They stepped off the train expecting torture chambers. What they found in the middle of Kansas, November 1943, would shatter every belief drilled into them by Mussolini's propaganda machine. 50,000 Italian prisoners of war, about to witness something their commanders swore was a lie designed to break enemy morale. The first transport arrives at Fort Riley. 3 months in cargo ship holds, packed so tight they slept standing up, surviving on moldy bread and water that tasted like rust. Their officers had repeated the same story for 2 years straight. America was on the brink of collapse, cities burning, people starving in the streets, one bad harvest from total surrender. Private Antonio Rossi from Naples steps onto American soil expecting chains. A sergeant hands him a meal ticket instead, not a ration card, a ticket to choose his own food. He thinks it's a trap, the Americans testing who takes too much, marking them for punishment later. But what they didn't know was every prisoner would get the same treatment, no exceptions, no tricks. They marched down Main Street in Salina, Kansas, not to cells, to a Safeway grocery store. The command is simple: pick your food for the week. Antonio stands at the entrance, boots still caked with mud from the Atlantic crossing, staring through windows that refract light off products stacked to the ceiling. His hand shakes on the door handle. The doors open, and 17 men freeze in the entrance. They're blocking the doorway, unable to process what they're seeing. An American housewife with a shopping cart squeezes past them, irritated by the delay. She's complaining about the price of butter going up 2 cents. 2 cents. Antonio's family sold furniture to buy butter on the black market. Fresh fruit, mountains of it. Apples stacked 5 feet high in wooden crates marked with farms he's never heard of. Oranges in pyramids that reach the ceiling, some already tumbling onto the floor because there are too many, because abundance means waste is acceptable. Bananas turning yellow under fluorescent lights that don't flicker, that work every hour of every day without rationing electricity. His village in Italy hasn't seen a banana since 1940. Here they cost 7 cents a pound, and nobody's fighting over them. A child walks past eating one, dropping the peel on the floor casually. In Sicily, that peel would be saved, boiled for whatever nutrients remained, but that's not what breaks him. The meat counter stretches 40 feet, beef hanging in refrigerated cases like it's normal, like abundance is just how things work here. Pork chops, chicken, ham, cuts he doesn't have names for in Italian or English. The refrigeration hums constantly, electricity powering machines that keep meat fresh, not for days but for weeks. A butcher in a clean white apron, sleeves rolled up, asks what he wants. Asks, like Antonio has choices, like enemy soldiers get to make decisions. Corporal Giuseppe Mancini from Sicily walks past the dairy section, and his legs stop working. He grabs a shelf for support. Another prisoner thinks he's having a heart attack, but Giuseppe is counting out loud in Italian. 1, 2, 3, 4. He gets to 17 and has to start over because he doesn't believe it. 17 types of cheese, he counts again. Still 17, more cheese in one store than his entire village produced in a year. Parmesan, cheddar, Swiss, mozzarella, provolone, brie, fontina, gorgonzola. Names he can't pronounce. Packages with labels describing flavor profiles like cheese is art, not survival. His mother sold her wedding ring last year to buy half a wheel of black market Parmesan. Here, a full wheel costs $1.85, less than a pack of cigarettes, less than a movie ticket. Giuseppe sits down on the floor and puts his head in his hands. Then Antonio sees the bread aisle, and his knees almost give out. Not 1 type, not 2, 17. No, he counts again. 19 types. White bread, wheat bread, rye, sourdough, Italian bread, French baguettes, rolls, buns, everything fresh, baked that morning, and it's Tuesday afternoon. There's no special occasion, no holiday, no rationing queue. This is just a regular day in Kansas. His sister wrote him 2 months ago. Their family was mixing sawdust with flour to make it last through winter. They were eating it in soup, pretending the grit was texture, not desperation. Here, bread is so cheap and abundant, they're feeding it to ducks in the park. He watched it on the march over, children throwing fresh bread to birds, while their mothers scolded them for wasting it. Inscreva-se para histórias de guerra que destroem tudo que você pensava saber. 2 vídeos por dia. A private named Lorenzo from Rome finds the canned goods section, aisle after aisle of metal containers, labeled and stacked in perfect rows. Tomatoes, beans, soup, vegetables, fruit, meat in cans that don't require refrigeration, that last for years. He picks up a can of peaches and reads the expiration date. It's good until 1946, 3 years from now. They're producing food faster than people can eat it, so they're preserving the surplus for a future that isn't desperate. But what they didn't know was this was the test. American commanders had a theory, developed by PSYOPs officers who understood that belief systems collapse faster than cities. Show enemy prisoners the industrial capacity that made victory inevitable, and they'd lose the will to resist. It was psychological warfare with grocery carts instead of bombs. The question wasn't whether it would work, the question was how long it would take. The prisoners pool their meal ticket money, convinced the whole thing is theater. They're whispering in Italian, debating strategy. Maybe it's a one-time show. Maybe the store is fake, stocked for propaganda photographs. Maybe tomorrow they'll reveal the truth, the shortages, the America that Mussolini described. They buy ingredients for pasta carbonara. Eggs, bacon, real parmesan, fresh garlic, olive oil, black pepper. Giuseppe is in charge of the shopping because he worked in his uncle's restaurant before the war. He's reading labels, checking prices, calculating what everything costs. His hands are shaking so badly he drops a carton of eggs. It breaks on the floor. He freezes, expecting punishment. The cashier walks over with a mop. "Don't worry about it, honey," she says in English he doesn't understand. She cleans it up, brings him a new carton, doesn't charge him for either one. Giuseppe stares at her like she's performing a magic trick. In Italy, breaking eggs meant going hungry. Here, it means a minor inconvenience. They're waiting in the checkout line behind American families doing their regular shopping. A woman in front of them is buying a turkey, cranberry sauce, sweet potatoes, pumpkin pie ingredients. The cashier asks if she's having company for dinner. "Just the family," the woman says. 8 people. 8 people. Antonio's extended family is 14 people, and they shared 1 chicken last Christmas. This woman is buying a £20 turkey for 8 people on a random Tuesday. The cashier rings it up, $3.47 total. The woman pays with a $5 bill and gets change. She's complaining that meat prices are getting ridiculous. When Giuseppe's turn comes, the cashier bags their groceries and wishes them a pleasant day. She doesn't ask why they're wearing prisoner uniforms. She doesn't stare. She treats them like customers, like humans, like the uniform doesn't matter. Giuseppe looks at his receipt. Everything cost $6.85, less than 1 week's pay for a factory worker. In Italy, this meal would cost 3 months of his father's salary, if you could find the ingredients at all. That night, 200 men gather around tables they built themselves in the camp workshop. Long wooden tables, sanded smooth, arranged in rows like a mess hall, but feeling like family. They're cooking with ingredients they chose, using American-provided pots and pans, in a kitchen with running water and gas stoves that work every time you turn the dial. No wood to gather, no rationing of fuel. Just turn the knob and fire appears. Giuseppe starts crying over the stove, and he won't stop. His shoulders are shaking. The bacon is sizzling in the pan, filling the room with a smell that makes men who haven't thought about home in months suddenly remember their mother's kitchens. Someone asks what's wrong. "I wrote my mother that Americans were cannibals," he says in Italian, not caring who hears. "I told her they ate their prisoners, that we'd be tortured and starved. I believed what they told us in training. I believed it when we shipped out. I believed it in the cargo hold, when we had nothing but moldy bread." He's stirring the pasta now, tears dropping into the pot. Now I'm eating better than I did before the war, better than my wedding day, better than Christmas. And she's starving in Sicily while Germans steal our grain to feed their own troops. I lied to my mother. I told her I was fighting for her, but I was fighting for the people who let her starve. The room goes quiet. 200 men standing around tables laden with more food than most of them have seen in 3 years. Real Parmesan, grated fresh, eggs from chickens that aren't rationed, bacon from pigs that Americans raise in such quantities they export the surplus. Every ingredient chosen freely, purchased fairly, prepared without fear. Someone says a prayer in Italian. They eat in silence. The numbers don't lie, and that's what makes everything worse. In 1943, the average Italian civilian is consuming 1,800 calories per day when they can find food. In German-occupied regions, it drops to 1,200. In some Greek islands under Italian occupation, people are dying at 800 calories daily. Children with distended bellies, old people too weak to walk, families eating grass soup and calling it dinner. These prisoners, labeled enemies of the state, marked for indefinite detention, are getting 3,500 calories daily, more than US. Soldiers on the front lines in the Pacific, where supply lines stretch across oceans, more than their own officers back in Rome, where rationing started in 1940 and never stopped. More than Mussolini himself, who made a propaganda show of eating the same rations as common soldiers. And it's not just food, it's everything. The barracks have heating that works, steam radiators that hiss and clang but pump out warmth all night, every night, through a Kansas winter that drops below zero. Real beds with mattresses, not straw pallets, not wooden slabs, actual mattresses with springs and padding. Clean sheets changed weekly by laundry services that use machines, not hands. Pillows, blankets thick enough that you don't need to sleep in your coat. Showers with hot water, not cold, not warm. Hot water on demand any time of day, from pipes that never freeze because the heating system works that well. Soap provided free, towels that are replaced when they wear out, toilets that flush, sinks with running water, mirrors on the walls, a recreation room with a radio that plays music without being confiscated, without being rationed to 2 hours daily, without cutting out because the electricity is being diverted to something more important. Books in Italian shipped from the library system, not propaganda, not approved texts, actual books including some that were banned in Italy. American guards who don't carry rifles inside the compound because they don't need to, because where would prisoners escape to, and why would they? Then everything changed when they started writing letters home. December 1943, Camp Weingarten, Missouri. A young lieutenant named Robert Chen sits at a desk in the censorship office, reading mail that will go through International Red Cross channels to Italy. It's routine work. Most letters are harmless. I'm alive, I'm well. Tell Maria I love her. Pray for me. Then he reads 3 sentences that make him stop breathing. Private Leonardo Moretti has written to his wife in Genoa. Maria, I'm eating meat every day. Real meat, not scraps. They have so much food they throw away what doesn't sell. Yesterday, I watched them dump 50 pounds of bread in a trash bin behind the grocery store because it was 1 day old. 1 day. I've gained 15 pounds since I arrived. The guards are fatter than our generals. I never want to leave. I'm safer here than I ever was in Italy. Lieutenant Chen reads it 3 times. Then he picks up the phone and calls his commanding officer. 30 minutes later, the commanding officer is calling Washington. It's not just one letter. Chen starts pulling files. Hundreds of letters, thousands across all camps. Every prisoner, same story, different words. They're describing abundance that sounds like fairy tales to families hiding from Allied bombs while eating grass soup. They're providing details, prices, quantities, varieties that read like intelligence reports on American industrial capacity. But what they didn't know was these letters were about to become the most effective propaganda weapon of the entire war. The War Department faces an impossible decision. These letters are technically classified information. They reveal American production capacity, resource availability, economic strength. If Axis intelligence intercepts them, they'd gain valuable strategic data about enemy capabilities. But they're also just soldiers telling their families they're alive and well-fed, which is every prisoner's right under the Geneva Convention. A general in Washington makes the call that will change the war's psychological dimension. Let the letters through, all of them, uncensored. Because if Italian families learn their sons are safer and better fed as America's prisoners than as Mussolini's soldiers, maybe they'll stop supporting the war. Maybe they'll start asking why their government sent boys to die for an empire that can't feed its own people. It's propaganda, but it's propaganda made of truth, which makes it unstoppable. By January 1944, the letters are having an effect nobody predicted. Maria Moretti in Genoa receives Leonardo's letter in a batch of mail delivered by Red Cross volunteers. She reads it 3 times, crying, then takes it to her neighbor. The neighbor reads it to her mother. Her mother tells the baker. The baker tells everyone who comes in for their rationed loaf. Within a week, 50 people in Genoa have heard about the American prison camps where Italian soldiers eat meat daily and gain weight. They don't believe it. They can't believe it. It must be torture, forcing Leonardo to write lies to break civilian morale. But then more letters arrive. Different prisoners, different camps, same impossible stories. Supermarkets with 17 types of cheese. Bread so abundant they feed it to birds. Meat in refrigerated cases. Hot water whenever you want it. Italian resistance fighters in Rome intercept copies being passed through underground networks. A partisan named Carlo Rossini runs a clandestine printing press in a basement below a bakery. He starts printing excerpts from the letters in anti-fascist newspapers that circulate through the black market, passed hand to hand, read by candlelight in cellars and attics. The January 15th edition features Leonardo's letter on the front page. The headline, American Prison or Italian Freedom. You decide. Te inscreva para fazer parte dessa jornada de histórias que ninguém mais conta, 2 vídeos por dia. By February, the letters are everywhere. Photocopies, handwritten transcriptions, verbal retellings that grow in detail with each iteration. The same propaganda machine that sent these men to war is being shredded by their own handwriting. Mussolini's regime had sworn America was weak, collapsing, barely surviving on British charity and Soviet sacrifice. Now mothers in Milan are reading letters from their sons, describing supermarkets that sound like heaven. But what they didn't know was how this was destroying military morale in ways no bombing campaign could match. April 1944. A Wehrmacht intelligence officer named Klaus Schreiber sits in a commandeered villa in Florence, interrogating an Italian partisan captured with resistance pamphlets. The pamphlets contain excerpts from POW letters, printed in Italian with smudged ink. Schreiber speaks fluent Italian, has lived in Rome for 3 years before the war. He asks where the partisan got such detailed Allied propaganda. The partisan, a teenager, maybe 17, with bruises already forming from the rough arrest, laughs in his face. Actually laughs. Schreiber hits him. The kid spits blood and keeps laughing. Propaganda? The partisan says. Those are letters from your own soldiers. Letters from boys you Germans sent to die, telling their mothers that America has so much food they feed it to their dogs. You told us the Allies were starving. You told us America was collapsing. You told us one more push and they'd surrender. You lied, and now everyone knows you lied. Schreiber burns the pamphlets in the fireplace, but you can't burn information that's already spreading through every village, every church, every black market corner where people trade rumors like currency. The letters keep coming, the truth keeps spreading, and in camps across America's heartland, Italian prisoners are learning something more dangerous than military secrets. They're learning that everything they fought for was built on lies. March 1944, Camp Atterbury, Indiana. Private Domenico Battaglia sits in the barracks after his work shift, writing a letter to his father in Turin. He's been in America for 4 months. He's gained 20 pounds, learned basic English, saved $60 from farm labor wages. He writes carefully, knowing censors will read it, but also knowing they're letting everything through now. Papa, I need to tell you something that will sound impossible. I'm working construction on a new hospital. I'm making 60 cents an hour, the same wage as American workers. I'm not treated differently because I'm a prisoner. Yesterday, the foreman invited me to his house for Sunday dinner. His wife made pot roast. His daughter taught me English by reading the newspaper. Domenico pauses, pen hovering over paper. Then he writes the sentence that will break his father's heart. Papa, I'm earning more as an enemy prisoner in America than you earned as a factory foreman in Turin's industrial heartland. I've done the calculations 3 times. Even accounting for cost of living differences, I'm earning more money, eating better food, living in better conditions as a captured enemy than as a free worker in Italy's most advanced industrial city. He signs it, seals it, sends it through Red Cross channels. His father receives it 6 weeks later. Antonio Battaglia reads it twice, then burns it in the stove. He doesn't show it to Domenico's mother. He doesn't tell his co-workers. Because if he admits his son is right, he has to admit that everything they built, everything they sacrificed for, everything the fascist regime promised about Italian strength and destiny, all of it was a lie compared to American abundance. But then came the decision that shattered military doctrine. June 1944, Camp Monticello, Arkansas. The War Department issues Revolutionary Order 847. Italian prisoners who cooperate can work outside the camps for wages. Real American dollars. Not camp script, not promises. Money they can spend in town, save in bank accounts, send home through official channels. It's voluntary. Nobody is forced. Guards expect maybe 10% to volunteer, mostly the desperate ones who need money for families back home. Within a week, 89% of the camp signs up, not 10%. 89%. Commanders are stunned. They run the numbers again, thinking there's a clerical error. There isn't. Prisoners are standing in lines, filling out paperwork, volunteering to work for their captors. Some are asking if they can work extra shifts. Others are requesting specific assignments based on skills they have. Mechanics, carpenters, electricians, farmers. They're not being coerced. They're competing for positions. The prisoners are sent to farms where labor shortages are crippling harvests. The war has taken every able-bodied man under 40. Crops are rotting in fields because there aren't enough hands to pick them. The prisoners arrive in trucks, dozens of them, still wearing their uniforms with POW patches on the shoulders. Farmers who lost sons in Italy now have Italian prisoners working their land. And something impossible happens. They're treated like employees, not slaves. Giuseppe ends up on a farm in Iowa, picking apples through September and October. The farmer's name is Robert Miller. He's 60 years old, has 3 sons in the army, lost one at Anzio. When Giuseppe arrives, he expects hatred, punishment, work designed to break him. Instead, Miller hands him work gloves and shows him how to use the ladder safely so the apples don't bruise. They eat lunch together. Miller's wife packs extra sandwiches, thick slices of ham on fresh bread with lettuce and tomatoes from their garden. She brings a thermos of cold lemonade. They sit under a tree during the break, and Miller asks Giuseppe where he's from in Sicily. He's been to Palermo once before the war. He liked the architecture. Giuseppe doesn't understand all the English, but he understands the tone. There's no hate, no anger. Miller is treating him like a person who happens to be doing work, not an enemy who deserves suffering. When the day ends, Miller pays him in cash, 60 cents an hour for 8 hours, $4.80. Giuseppe stares at the bills in his hand. His father made 850 lire per month as a skilled factory worker. That's about $43 at the exchange rate. Giuseppe just made $4.80 in one day as a prisoner picking apples. He does the math. If he works 6 days a week, that's $28.80 weekly, $115.20 monthly, nearly 3 times what his father earned in Italy's industrial heartland. This wasn't supposed to be possible. These were enemy combatants, trained to hate America, told that capitalism meant exploitation and misery. Instead, they're working next to farmers' daughters who pack them extra sandwiches. They're learning English from kids who think Italian accents are cool. They're being invited to Sunday dinners where tables overflow with food nobody's hoarding or rationing. But what they didn't know was this was changing them in ways that couldn't be reversed. September 1944. A prisoner named Carlo Benedetti works a farm in Iowa owned by the Miller family. Robert Miller's daughter is named Catherine. She's 19, teaches at the local elementary school, helps with the farm on weekends and summers. She starts teaching Carlo English using the newspaper, sitting on the porch after dinner, while her father smokes his pipe and pretends not to notice. Carlo is learning fast. He's motivated. Catherine is patient. By October, they're having actual conversations. By November, Carlo is helping her grade papers, his English improving daily. By December, when the first snow falls, Carlo asks Robert Miller for permission to court his daughter. Miller should say no. His son died fighting Italians. This man was the enemy 6 months ago. But Miller sees how Catherine smiles when Carlo arrives for lessons. He sees how Carlo works, never late, never lazy, treating every apple like it matters. He sees a kid who got trapped in a bad uniform and is trying to find his way to something better. Miller says yes. Carlo and Catherine marry in September 1945, 2 months after the war ends. The wedding is in the Miller family church. Half the town attends. Former guards from the camp are there. Other Italian prisoners, now free men choosing to stay, are there. Carlo's battalion commander from the Italian army would have shot him for treason if he could see it. Their grandson is a state senator now. Name is Michael Benedetti Miller. He has his grandfather's eyes and his grandmother's determination. He gives speeches about immigration, about second chances, about how enemies become family if you give them the opportunity. But what happened next broke 200 years of military tradition and changed how wars end. September 8th, 1943. Italy surrenders. The announcement comes through radio broadcasts, through official channels, through rumors that spread faster than news. The prisoners expect immediate repatriation, process them quickly, ship them home, let them rebuild their shattered country. America won, Italy lost. That's how wars end. Instead, American commanders offer a choice that's never been made in modern military history. Stay as Italian service units, co-belligerent workers supporting the Allied war effort, or return to Italy, which is now a battlefield between retreating Germans and advancing Allies. Stay and work for wages, or go home to a country that's been bombed flat, where Germans are stealing everything not nailed down, where the front line moves daily and nobody knows who's winning anymore. The commanders expect most prisoners to choose home. Family, culture, language, belonging. These things matter more than money or safety. Maybe 20% will stay, mostly the ones without families or with nothing to return to. Maybe 30% at the absolute maximum. 94% choose to stay. Commanders check the numbers 3 times, thinking there's been a mistake in the count. There hasn't. The prisoners have done their own math, made their own calculations, reached their own conclusions. They're safer and better fed and have more opportunity as America's former enemies than they'd have as Italy's returning heroes. The War Department creates new classifications, new rules, new precedents. Former enemies now maintaining American military bases, fixing equipment, building infrastructure at stateside installations. They're getting paid standard wages, living in open barracks with gates they could walk through any time, shopping at the same stores as the guards who used to watch them. Some are sending more money home than Italian soldiers ever earned fighting. Giuseppe from Sicily, now working 3 nights a week washing dishes at a diner in Texas, mails $200 to his mother in Palermo. That's 6 months' salary for an Italian army officer. His mother writes back asking if he's robbing banks, if he's in danger, if the Americans are forcing him to do illegal work. He explains he's washing dishes. She doesn't believe him. Sua inscrição me ajuda a continuar trazendo histórias de guerra que ninguém mais mostra. 2 vídeos por dia. The contrast gets more brutal every month. In occupied Italy, Germans are stealing grain from farmers to feed troops retreating north. They're burning villages suspected of hiding partisans. They're executing civilians for resistance they may not have committed, killing hostages in ratios of 10 Italians for every German soldier killed by resistance fighters. Meanwhile, in Oklahoma, Italian POWs are attending county fairs. They're eating corn dogs and cotton candy. They're riding Ferris wheels with local families who stopped seeing them as the enemy 6 months ago. They're winning prizes at shooting galleries, playing games, buying souvenirs with money they earned honestly. Children are asking them to teach Italian curse words, thinking it's hilarious when they learn what the words actually mean. In Naples, a mother named Sofia Ricci waits in a bread line for 3 hours. When she reaches the front, they're out of bread. She's been waiting since 4 a.m. She goes home with nothing. That night, she receives a letter from her son Marco, who's working at Camp Shelby, Mississippi. He sends her $150 and describes the all-you-can-eat breakfast buffet at the camp. Eggs, bacon, sausage, pancakes, fruit, coffee, orange juice. He says he's gained 30 pounds and feels guilty about it. Sophia cries reading the letter, not because she's sad, because she realizes her son is alive and thriving while she's starving, and the people keeping him alive are the ones she was told to hate. The equation doesn't make sense. The enemy is feeding her son better than her own country ever did. What does that make her country? What does that make the enemy? Then the intelligence reports reach Axis hands, and the equation changes completely in ways nobody predicted. November 1944. A German intelligence officer named Wilhelm Hartmann, stationed in Milan, intercepts American newspaper clippings being smuggled into Italy through Swiss intermediaries. The articles describe Italian service units working on American farms, attending town festivals, integrating into communities. There are photographs, Italian prisoners playing baseball with American soldiers, eating at diners, shopping in stores. Hartmann writes a memo to his superiors in Berlin. The memo is 15 pages long, classified top secret, distributed to only 3 people in the high command. The core paragraph reads, "The Americans have weaponized abundance. They are not defeating us with superior tactics or technology. They are defeating us by showing our allies what prosperity looks like. They are demonstrating that their economic system produces surplus, while ours produces scarcity. We cannot counter this with propaganda, because the evidence is empirical. Italian prisoners are sending home more money than Italian soldiers earn. They are eating better than German officers. We cannot compete with this. We can only hope to prevent the information from spreading further, but it may already be too late." He's right. You can't propaganda your way out of truth when the truth comes in letters written by sons to mothers, backed by money orders that clear through banks. Nazi newsreels show American cities burning from air raids, but Italian families are getting letters describing movie theaters showing new films every week. Fascist radio claims America is rationing everything down to toothpaste, but prisoners are sending photographs of themselves in front of stores overflowing with goods. The psychological damage is catastrophic and irreversible. Every letter that makes it through is proof that the Axis fought the war for a lie. The weak, decadent Americans aren't weak. They're so powerful they can afford to be generous. The starving, collapsing industrial base is producing so much surplus, they're feeding enemy soldiers better than the Axis feeds its own. But what they didn't know was the long-term effect would reshape post-war Italy forever in ways that echo through generations. January 1945, Camp Hereford, Texas. American guards discover something during a routine inspection. Prisoners are hiding food under their bunks, not to trade on black markets. There are no black markets in American POW camps, not to hoard for power. There's no underground economy that would give them power. They're saving it because they don't believe the abundance will last. A lieutenant from Calabria named Paolo Greco has 17 loaves of bread wrapped in cloth under his mattress. Some are moldy, some are rock hard. He's been collecting them for 3 months, one per week, letting them accumulate like insurance against the shortages that must be coming. The guard asks why. Paolo explains in broken English that shortages always come. It's how the world works. You store food when you have it because tomorrow you won't. It's survival instinct, burned into him by growing up in a country where scarcity was normal and abundance was propaganda. The guard tries to explain that America overproduces, that farmers are paid to not plant crops because there's too much food, that factories are running below capacity because demand can't keep up with supply, that the economy is based on excess, not scarcity, on stimulating consumption rather than rationing supply. Paolo doesn't believe him, can't believe him. It's too alien to his understanding of how economies work. So the guard takes him on a field trip, gets permission to drive him into town, shows him the grocery store on a random Wednesday afternoon. The store is fully stocked, same as it was in November when Paolo first arrived, same as it was in December during Christmas shopping when you'd expect shortages, same as it is today in January when winter typically means scarcity. The abundance is permanent, structural, built into the system itself. Paolo stands in the bread aisle, counting loaves. 47 different types across the store. He picks up a one-day-old loaf from the discount bin. Perfectly good bread, just not fresh enough to sell at full price. It costs 4 cents. 4 cents for bread that would have saved his family during the winter of 1942. He sits down on the floor and cries, not because he's sad, because he finally understands. This isn't a lucky year or wartime propaganda or temporary abundance that will collapse. This is just how America works. This is the system. They've solved the problem of scarcity so thoroughly that their main economic concern is overproduction. And if that's true, if abundance is permanent and structural rather than temporary and lucky, then everything Paolo fought for was based on economic models that couldn't compete with a country that had fundamentally different assumptions about what was possible. This is the moment everything breaks for thousands of prisoners. Because it's one thing to see abundance as a prisoner with limited access. It's another to realize the abundance is permanent, that this isn't an exception, it's the rule, that American families live like this every day, have lived like this for decades, will continue living like this because the system is designed to produce surplus. They'd been taught that capitalism meant exploitation and poverty for workers. Instead, they're watching American factory workers buy cars, own homes, eat meat daily, send their children to free public schools. They'd been taught that democracy meant chaos and weakness. Instead, they're watching a system that's organizing the largest industrial mobilization in human history, while simultaneously maintaining civilian abundance. The propaganda collapses. Not because someone convinced them it was wrong, because they're living inside the evidence that it was always wrong. March 1945. A funeral is held at Camp Shelby, Mississippi. A prisoner named Marco Ricci has died, not from violence or mistreatment, but from appendicitis that turned septic before doctors could operate. He was 23. American military chaplains conduct the service. Guards attend as pallbearers. The camp commander gives a eulogy. 60 Italian prisoners attend. They're not required to. They choose to. They stand in the rain, while an American chaplain reads prayers in English that most of them don't fully understand. But they understand the respect. They understand that their captor is treating their fallen friend with dignity, that he's being buried with military honors, even though he was an enemy soldier. After the service, the prisoners pool money to send to Marco's mother in Naples. They collect 340, more than an Italian army captain makes in a year. They write a collective letter explaining that Marco was well treated, well fed, died from natural causes with medical care, was mourned by guards who became his friends. Sofia Ricci receives the letter and the money 3 weeks later. She reads about how 60 prisoners attended her son's funeral by choice, how American guards carried his coffin, how a camp commander who never met Marco before he died stood in the rain to say prayers over his grave, how his former enemies became his friends. She takes the letter to her priest. He reads it and doesn't know what to say. How do you process that information? How do you reconcile enemies who show more care for your son than your own country did? What does it mean when the people you were told to hate demonstrate more humanity than the people you were told to trust? The priest keeps the letter. It's still in church archives, preserved behind glass in a display about Italian POWs in America. School children visit on field trips. They ask why Americans would be kind to enemies. Teachers struggle to explain. Eventually they settle on, sometimes the people we're told to hate aren't actually our enemies. Sometimes our real enemies are the ones who lie to us about who our enemies are. Then came the final revelation that changed everything and rewrote the rules of warfare forever. May 1945, Germany surrenders. The war in Europe is over. Camps across America begin processing repatriation paperwork, expecting prisoners to rush home to families they haven't seen in 2 years. The American Red Cross conducts exit interviews, standard procedure, asking about treatment, conditions, complaints for Geneva Convention compliance. The first interview at Camp Atterbury, Indiana. The interviewer is a Red Cross volunteer named Margaret Holmes. She's done hundreds of these interviews with German and Italian POWs. The questions are standard. Were you treated fairly? Did you receive adequate food? Were you subjected to abuse? Did you receive mail from home? She finishes the standard questions and asks the final one. When would you like to be scheduled for repatriation? The prisoner, a 30-year-old corporal from Rome named Antonio Greco, says, I don't want to go back. Margaret looks up from her clipboard. She's heard prisoners say they're nervous about returning, heard them ask about delays, heard them request a few more weeks to save money. She's never heard someone flatly refuse repatriation. I'm sorry, could you repeat that? I don't want to go back to Italy, Antonio says in careful English he's learned over 2 years. I want to stay in America. I want to apply for immigration. I have saved $847. I have a job offer from the farm where I worked. The owner says he will sponsor me. I want to stay. Margaret writes this down, thinking it's an anomaly. Then she conducts 20 more interviews that day. 18 prisoners say the same thing. Different words, same message. We want to stay. By the end of the week, the numbers are impossible to ignore. At Camp Atterbury alone, 1,947 prisoners out of 2,100 have requested immigration paperwork instead of repatriation. That's 88%. Commanders think there's been a miscommunication, that prisoners don't understand the question. They bring in Italian-speaking officers to re-interview. The numbers don't change. The prisoners understand perfectly. They're choosing America over Italy. They're choosing to stay in the country that captured them rather than return to the country that sent them to war. Camp officials are baffled. These men were captured fighting against America. They should hate this place, should be desperate to return home, should prioritize family and culture over money and opportunity. But they're not. They're making cold calculations based on 2 years of evidence, and the evidence says America offers a better future than Italy. One prisoner explains it with brutal honesty. In Italy, I have my mother, my sisters, my village. In America, I have a future. In Italy, I am a defeated soldier returning to a country that's been destroyed. In America, I am a worker with skills and savings and opportunities. My mother will understand. She wants me to survive, not just return. But what they didn't know was this decision would tear apart thousands of families and reshape Italian immigration forever. Giuseppe from Sicily fills out immigration paperwork in June 1945. He's been in America for 20 months. He's saved $1,200 working farm jobs and restaurant shifts. He's learned English fluently. He has a job offer from a restaurant owner in Bloomington, Indiana, who wants to retire and is willing to sell the business to Giuseppe on a payment plan. His mother writes him begging him to come home. She's alone. His father died during an Allied bombing raid in 1943. His sisters married men who survived the war but returned broken, unable to work, traumatized. The family needs him. Sicily needs men to rebuild. How can he abandon them? Giuseppe writes back with a letter that takes him 3 days to compose. Mama, I love you more than my own life, but if I come back to Sicily, I will be poor forever. I will work until my body breaks and never have enough. I will watch my children go hungry like we went hungry. I will watch them leave for other countries looking for the opportunities I'm walking away from by returning. If I stay in America, I can send you money. More money than I could ever earn in Sicily, enough to support you, to help my sisters, to give their children educations. I can bring you here in 2 years once I'm established. I can give our family a future instead of just a reunion. I'm not abandoning you. I'm choosing the only way to actually help you. America didn't defeat me. It showed me what's possible when systems are built to create abundance instead of managing scarcity. I can't unsee that. I can't go back to pretending poverty is inevitable. I'm sorry, Mama. I'm staying. His mother never responds. She dies in 1949 without ever speaking to him again. Giuseppe inherits nothing. His sisters split what little remains of the family property, but by 1949, Giuseppe has brought both sisters and their families to America, sponsored their immigration, given them jobs in his restaurant. They're not wealthy, but they're eating every day. Their children are in school. They have futures. The cost was his mother's forgiveness. Giuseppe lives with that until he dies in 1987. His grandson, who runs 3 locations of the restaurant now, keeps the letter framed in his office. It's yellowed, the ink faded, but the words are still readable. School groups tour the restaurant sometimes. They ask about the letter. The grandson explains, "My grandfather made an impossible choice. He chose his family's future over his family's present. History proved him right, but being right doesn't make it hurt less." By June 1946, the numbers tell a story that rewrites everything military historians thought they knew about prisoner psychology and repatriation. Of 50,000 Italian prisoners held in America, 40,127 have applied for immigration papers. That's 80%, not a small minority, not even a slim majority, an overwhelming supermajority choosing to stay in the country that defeated them rather than return to the country they fought for. Of those 40,127 applications, 34,191 are approved. That's 70% of all Italian POWs in America choosing and being allowed to stay permanently. The largest single-war prisoner-to-immigrant conversion in American history. Larger than any refugee wave, larger than any asylum program. Just prisoners who saw the inside of the system and decided it was better than what they left behind. The War Department is forced to create new policies, new procedures, new legal frameworks. Congress debates special immigration quotas. Italian-American communities are divided. Some welcome the newcomers as brothers who suffered. Others see them as enemies who don't deserve the opportunities their families worked generations to earn. President Truman makes a decision that will reshape immigration policy for decades. Italian service unit members with clean records and employment offers get expedited permanent residence processing. It's controversial. Veterans groups protest. But Truman understands something crucial. These men are living proof that America's system works so well that even enemies want to join it. It's the most powerful propaganda America never intentionally created. But then came the stories of those who went back, and their fate sealed the narrative forever. Antonio Rossi, the first man off the train in Kansas, the private from Naples who stood frozen in the Safeway entrance, applies for immigration in May 1945. He's saved $920. He has a job offer from a construction company in Topeka. He's learned English, made friends, has an American girlfriend whose father owns a hardware store, and doesn't care that Antonio was enemy 3 years ago. His application is denied, Minor criminal record from before the war, a fight in Naples in 1938, drunk and stupid, resulting in a conviction for assault. Under normal immigration law, it's disqualifying. Antonio appeals. The appeal is denied. By December 1945, he's out of options. He's repatriated in February 1946, shipped back to Naples with 4,000 other men whose applications were rejected. They arrive to a city that's been bombed flat. Buildings are rubble, infrastructure destroyed, economy collapsed. The lira is worthless. Black markets run everything. Allied occupation forces control what little government exists. Antonio walks through his old neighborhood and can't recognize it. The cafe where he had his first drink is gone. The church where he was baptized is a shell with no roof. His family's apartment building took a direct hit in 1943. Everyone survived, but they're living in a single room in a building that used to house 4 families and now houses 23. His mother cries when she sees him. She's aged 20 years in 3. She's thin, so thin he can see her ribs through her dress. His sister is there with her 2 children, ages 4 and 6. They're quiet, too quiet, the way children get when hunger is normal and food is surprising. Antonio has $920 in his pocket, his entire savings from America. He gives his mother $500. It's enough to feed the family for 6 months if they're careful. He keeps $420 to start a business, some kind of work, something to build a future on. Within 3 weeks, the money is gone. Not stolen, just consumed by a collapsed economy where everything costs more than it should and nothing works like it's supposed to. Bribes to get ration cards, payments to secure a stall in the market, fees to restore utilities that only work 3 hours a day. The $420 disappears like water in sand. By April, Antonio is working construction for a British contractor rebuilding Allied military facilities. The pay is 3,000 lire per week. That's about $17 at the exchange rate, but nobody honors the exchange rate. On the black market, where real business happens, it's worth maybe $8. He's earning in a week what he earned in 1 day in Kansas. He writes a letter to his former camp commander in July 1946. "Sir, I was wrong to go home. I spent 3 years in your prison, eating like a king, working like a man, saving like someone with a future. Now I'm free in my own country and starving. Free to work all day for money that buys nothing. Free to watch my nieces eat bread and water for dinner and pretend it's normal. The Americans won because they understood something we never did. You can't build an empire on empty stomachs. You can only build it on full ones. You can't ask men to die for glory when they're hungry. You can only ask them to die for countries that feed them first. I'm trying to immigrate again. I'll leave out the criminal conviction. I'll lie on the forms. I'll do whatever it takes, because I've seen both sides now, and I know which one actually cares whether I survive. Please, sir, if there's anything you can do to help, I'm begging you. I don't want to die in Naples. I want to live in Kansas." The commander never responds. There's nothing he can do. The immigration laws are clear. By 1948, Antonio stops trying. He marries a local girl, has 3 children, works construction until his body breaks. He dies in 1972, age 54, having never returned to America. His children immigrate in 1985, part of the wave of Italian economic migration. They use money from selling their father's house to pay for passage. They settle in New Jersey. They don't tell immigration officials their father was a POW who tried and failed to stay in 1946. Antonio's grandson, a 42-year-old software engineer in Boston, only learns the story in 2018 when his mother is dying and decides it's time to tell family history. He finds the letter his grandfather wrote in 1946, preserved in National Archives because it was addressed to military personnel. He reads it and understands why his mother never talked about her father. He spent his whole life, she tells her son from her hospital bed, mourning a country that wasn't his. He'd seen heaven and been forced back to hell. How do you live with that? How do you raise children in the ruins when you know what abundance looks like? She dies the next week. At her funeral, her son reads Antonio's letter aloud. Half the family doesn't understand why. The other half cries. Se ainda não se inscreveu no canal, está perdendo histórias assim todos os dias, 2 vídeos diários. The final numbers tell a story more powerful than any single narrative. Italian POWs in American camps, 1943-1946, 50,000 captured and held stateside. 40,127 applied for immigration. 34,191 approved and stayed permanently. 69.8% of all Italian POWs chose to become American instead of returning Italian. During their captivity, they collectively sent 2.3 million to families in Italy, more money than Italian soldiers earned fighting for Mussolini. Their letters reached an estimated 500,000 Italian civilians, spreading information about American abundance that no propaganda campaign could match. Post-war surveys indicate those letters influenced Italian voters to support democratic parties over communist ones in the critical 1948 elections. Italy stayed in the Western Bloc, partially because prisoners wrote home about supermarkets. The ripple effects lasted decades and reshaped post-war Europe. Post-war Italy rebuilt with Marshall Plan aid, but the economic model shifted fundamentally. The command economy of fascism gave way to market systems prioritizing production and abundance. Italian economists who'd been prisoners in America became advisors to post-war governments, industrial planners, university professors teaching the next generation. They'd seen what worked. They knew what was possible. One of them, Professor Giovanni Rossi, no relation to Antonio, former prisoner at Camp Swift, Texas, wrote in his influential 1952 economics textbook, "We lost the war in 1943 when our soldiers saw American supermarkets. Everything after that was just waiting for the official surrender. You cannot fight an economy that has solved scarcity. You can only join it or be left behind." Italy's choice in 1948 was not between communism and capitalism. It was between systems that create abundance and systems that manage poverty. Having seen both, having lived inside the American system as prisoners, thousands of Italian soldiers made their choice. They chose abundance. They chose the future. Italy wisely followed. The book became required reading in Italian universities for 30 years. 3 generations of Italian economists learned that abundance isn't lucky, it's designed, that prosperity isn't zero-sum, it's created, that systems matter more than ideology, that you can measure economic success by what prisoners choose when given the option to stay or leave. But the most telling statistic comes from genealogical research conducted in 2019 by historians at the University of Chicago. Of the 34,191 Italian POWs who stayed in America, their descendants now number approximately 287,000 people. Engineers, doctors, teachers, business owners, politicians, soldiers, artists. They've collectively paid an estimated $4.7 billion in federal taxes over 3 generations. They've started 12,147 businesses. They've served in every American military conflict since World War II, including Iraq and Afghanistan, where they fought against countries that in an alternate timeline might have been allies if Italy had won. Giuseppe's restaurant in Bloomington, Indiana, the one he opened in 1946 with savings from washing dishes, generated $2.3 million in revenue last year. His grandson employs 47 people. The pasta carbonara recipe is the same one Giuseppe made that first night in camp in 1943, crying over the stove, realizing everything he'd been told was a lie. The carbonara costs $18.95 now, inflation, but it's still the best-selling item on the menu. American families order it every Friday night, not knowing they're eating a recipe that represents the exact moment 50,000 Italian soldiers realized they'd been fighting for the wrong side. That's what the American commanders understood, that Axis leadership never could. You don't defeat enemies by destroying them. You defeat them by showing them a better system, then inviting them to join it. The Italian POWs weren't converted by propaganda. They were converted by seeing that abundance isn't a zero-sum game, that prosperity doesn't require conquest, that you can feed your enemies and still win. The equation had changed completely, and it changed in a grocery store in Kansas, not a battlefield in Italy. They'd crossed an ocean to destroy a country they were told was weak and dying. They found an empire so powerful it could feed its enemies better than their allies, so confident in victory it could afford to be generous, so abundant it could waste more food in a day than Italian villages saw in a month. Every orange they bought, every steak they grilled, every movie ticket they purchased was proof that the war was always unwinnable, not because of weapons or tactics, but because one side had built a system that created more than it consumed, while the other side was cannibalizing itself to feed a war machine that couldn't compete. In the end, the war wasn't won by generals or bombs, it was won by systems, by economies that generated surplus instead of managing scarcity, by societies that could simultaneously fight the largest war in human history and maintain civilian abundance, by a country that proved you could be generous to enemies because you had so much that generosity cost nothing. The Italian POWs understood this before their leaders did. They saw the math. They made the choice. And in making that choice, they became the most effective propaganda weapon America never planned to create. Living proof that the American system worked so well that even enemies wanted to join it. They'd mocked the American dream as propaganda designed to weaken enemy morale. They'd been told it was lies, exaggerations, capitalist fantasy that would collapse under the weight of its own contradictions. Until 50,000 Italian soldiers stood in Midwestern grocery stores, holding meal tickets worth more than their fathers earned in a month, staring at abundance that shouldn't exist, according to everything they'd been taught about economics and power and how empires work. And in that moment, surrounded by 17 types of cheese and bread that cost less than cigarettes, they realized the propaganda was real. The dream was real. The abundance was real. The system that created it was real and sustainable and powerful enough to win wars without firing shots. They'd just been fighting for the wrong side, and 69.8% of them made the only rational choice available. They switched sides, not because they were cowards, not because they were traitors, but because they'd seen the future, and the future was a grocery store in Kansas where anyone, even enemy prisoners, could walk in and choose what to eat. That's the story of how America won World War II before the last bomb dropped. Not with weapons, with supermarkets.